Hi, I'm Patrick Dunnican. At Gibbons, we believe that citizens need to be informed about the complex issues that affect their lives. That's why we're proud to support the programming produced by the Caucus Educational Corporation and their partners in public television.
Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by Gibbons PC, Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. NJM Insurance Group, serving New Jersey's drivers, homeowners, and business owners for more than 100 years. Operating Engineers, Local 825. And by IBEW Local 102, lighting the path, leading the way. Promotional support provided by AM 970 The Answer and by Insider NJ.
This is One-on-One. I'm an equal American just like you are.
The jobs of tomorrow are not the jobs of yesterday.
Look at this. You got this?
Here it is, man. Look at that.
Life without dance is boring.
I don't care how good you are or how good you think you are, there is always something to learn.
Do you enjoy talking politics?
No.
People call me because they feel nobody's paying attention.
Our culture, I don't think, has ever been tested the way it's being tested right now.
Such a good question. High five.
Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. Welcome to a very important conversation with former governor of New Jersey, Christie. This interview was taped on the 18th of June. It's obviously being seen later. The world has changed, the country has changed, the state has changed, everything's changing, particularly related to COVID-19, the number of cases and deaths. Reached out for Governor Christie directly and personally. We have a very candid conversation. I asked Governor, is there anything you want to change? Anything you would say differently? Anything you want to have a redo because the world has changed? He said, nope, I stand by what I said. Every part of it. So, uncut, unedited, without further ado, my conversation with Governor Christie. Welcome to Uncut. I'm Steve Adubato. We have the honor, the pleasure of being joined by the former governor of the great state of New Jersey, Christie. Governor, how are you doing?
Doing very well, Steve. How are you and the family?
We're doing great. By the way, speaking about family, talk to us about, in fact, we're taping this toward the middle of late June. What has it been like for you and your family since the quarantine started back in mid-March and a whole range of iterations since then?
Well, our two older children, Andrew and Sarah, who are working and living in New York City, moved back here in mid-March to get out of New York City. And so everyone, all six of us have been living together again now for the last 3 months, which is something that's new. I think the only silver lining that we find in all of this, Steve, is we've had more dinners together in the last 3 months than we probably had in the 10 years before that, given my career and what was going on with me as governor and U.S. attorney. So that part of it's been the only silver lining. But the other good thing, obviously, is everyone in our family has been healthy. And so we're obviously thankful for that.
Governor, talk to us about, again, we're going to talk about the New Jersey 30-day fund in just a moment. But you've had very strong feelings and you've expressed them publicly about opening up. Describe what it means to open up. And again, this will be dated, but we'll see it later. Big picture, opening up means what?
Opening up means giving people their way of life back in some measure. Now, it's analogous to 9/11, Steve. Our lives changed significantly after September 11th, but now, nearly 20 years afterwards, those things have become a part of everyday life, whether it's the security at the airports and security at office buildings and all the rest. Here, until there's a vaccine, we're going to be wearing masks. We're going to be socially distancing. We're going to be, not shaking hands. We're going to be washing hands frequently, washing surfaces. All those things need to be done, but we can no longer stay shut in. In the month of May, Steve, the most frequently used medical diagnostic code in America was for mental health disorder. The American people cannot stay shut in. They can't see their livelihoods and their businesses go down the drain, in order to save some lives. Because what we're doing is we're sacrificing lives in the process. What you've seen increase during this shutdown is domestic violence, drug and alcohol abuse, and suicide. So the question is, how do we balance losing as few lives as possible to the coronavirus with losing as few lives as possible to the mental health crisis that's going on in this country, that's driven in large measure by the economic crisis that the shutdown created. One last thing, remember, Governor Murphy and others sold us all on the shutdown as a way to flatten the curve, not to eliminate all deaths. That's not going to be able to happen until and unless we have a vaccine. So we flatten the curve. The threat to our healthcare system is over, and we need to now get back to work.
I have to tell you, there are a lot of people who hear that and it's jarring. I think you're saying, and help us understand this, I think you're saying we have to accept a certain amount of death in order to move forward. Put some context on that, because it doesn't sound like you.
No, Steve, it is me, because it's realistic and it's honest. Nobody likes any loss of life, myself or anyone else in the state. We all love our neighbors and our friends and our family. But this virus is an awfully virulent virus. And there are some people who are particularly vulnerable, the elderly, people with underlying medical conditions, that if they get it, they're much more likely to die. And so we have to live with the idea that until there's a vaccine, the same way that we had to live with the idea that people would be crippled until there was a polio vaccine, we have to live with the idea that there will be some death. But what we're not taking into account, I think, with the very hard shutdown, is the death that's being caused by the shutdown. The murder, the suicides rather, the domestic violence, the drug and alcohol abuse. I mean, we have a huge opioid crisis, as you know, in this country, and this is only making it worse.
And you've talked a lot about the opioid crisis. Governor, try this. I'm always curious about former governors, and you're an interesting former governor in a lot of ways, not the least of which is you're right there at ABC as an analyst with George Stephanopoulos and others. We check you out on Sundays. You always speak your mind. You did it when you were governor, you do it now. Have you had any conversations with Governor Murphy about, quote, leading in a crisis, much less a pandemic like this?
No, I haven't.
Has he asked?
No, he hasn't.
If he asked, what would you tell him?
I would tell him that it's very important to be completely transparent, to be completely visibly honest with people, and to not sugarcoat things, because people need to know the truth. But secondly, I'd say that the only way we recover from any type of crisis is to put faith and confidence in the people of the state. And so I would say to him, you can't control everything. You can't control every person's conduct, and you have to have faith and confidence in the people who elected you. I always had that after Sandy. I believed that our people would do the best thing for their neighbors and their friends. And there are always going to be a couple of exceptions, Steve, but for the most part, they did. So it's be completely transparent first and foremost. And then secondly, to have faith and confidence in the people that elected you. And those are the two biggest bits of advice I would give him if he asked.
Governor, talk about this New Jersey 30-day fund. You and former First Lady Mary Pat Christie, I think it was on Good Morning America where you announced it. Then you were on a whole range of other media outlets talking about it. What is it and why is it so important?
Steve, the really small businesses in our state, from 3 to 30 employees, are the ones who have really been hurt without being able to get a lot of help in this crisis. When you're that small, you usually don't have great relationships with banks. You are not a big customer. And so the Paycheck Protection Program, while it was a good program, it kind of missed that 3 to 30 slice of really small kind of mom and pop businesses. So Mary Pat and I heard a lot about that. We heard about folks in Virginia doing something called the 30-day fund, which was to raise money to give forgivable loans, $3,000 forgivable loans. If you get back up on your feet and you can pay it back to us, and we'll turn that around to another business and pay it forward. If you can't, it's a completely forgivable loan. And I will tell you, we've started this already. We gave out our first 20 loans already to folks, and the reaction has really been emotional. It makes a huge difference to people. Even $3,000 can make a huge difference in them being able to continue to keep their business alive while they're waiting for the wet blanket of this shutdown to be lifted off of them in New Jersey.
Real quick, before we go to break, Governor's going to stay with us for a second segment on Uncut, which will be seen not just on social media, but on our public television outlets as well. Governor, I'm curious about this. You've spoken to, and one of the things about Sandy that always struck me about your leadership is that you were out there among people. I remember being on the boardwalk and you're talking to business owners. What are business owners telling you as of when we're taping this toward the back end of June? What are they telling you their lives have been like?
That they're dying and they need relief, Steve. One of the great restaurants that Mary Pat and I went to in Asbury Park, and there's been a lot of controversy about Asbury Park. The governor sued them to not let them open their restaurants. A great restaurant named Modine, owned by young people, closed now permanently. They're not going to reopen. We're going to see that over and over again. And that's what we're hearing from small business people, that you have to let the foot of government off our throats. You have to stop saying that we can't open in any respect, because these businesses are going to be lost forever. And that's why we came forward with this 30-day fund to try to help those really small businesses who don't have bank relationships and don't have the ability to stay afloat during this. And we're talking about Steve, just to give you some example, we've been open now for 6 days.
So as of now, 6 days, give us the numbers.
We already have over 2,000 applications in 8 days, in 6 days rather, 2,000 applications. That'll give you the sense of the scope of this in New Jersey. And, we're working our way through those applications, and we're raising money to try to make sure we put the first $100,000 in of our personal money to fund this. And we're raising money from others to try to help as many businesses as we can. So that's what they're doing. They're dying, Steve. The small business community is dying in this state, and they need help.
This is Uncut. We haven't spoken to Governor Chris Christie in a couple of years. You know that he has been busy. He, as I said, with ABC as an analyst. You're practicing law as well?
Practicing law, doing consulting for businesses, and on some corporate boards.
This is Uncut. That's Chris Christie. I'm Steve Adubato. I'll be right back right after this.
To watch more One-on-One with Steve Adubato, find us online and follow us on social media.
This is Uncut. I'm Steve Adubato. We're once again with Governor Chris Christie. Governor, let's jump into a little politics. You do political analysis with ABC every Sunday. By the way, tell everyone it's okay to plug, even though it's another network. When is it?
Absolutely. And for your New York viewers, it's 10 a.m. every Sunday on Channel 7 WABC. And for your Philadelphia viewers, it's at 10:30 a.m. on Channel 6 WPVI.
By the way, if you're in Connecticut, it's also ABC out of New York. Not everyone has their own affiliate.
Yeah.
Well, this is public television. This is Uncut. This is Chris Christie. We're going to talk a little politics. Governor, you have said that you have not been asked to advise Governor Murphy, but you do advise President Trump.
I do.
Two things. One, what have you advised them as it relates to leading during the coronavirus? And then we'll talk a little politics and civility, which I know is a big priority for you. You did not mention the Seton Hall University initiative called the
Christie Institute of Public Policy,
which focuses on a more civil discourse in politics. We'll get to that in a minute. What have you advised President Trump about leading in this pandemic?
Well, again, going all the way back to February and March when we were talking about it, Steve, I've told him that, he needed to be visible. He needed to be someone who was seen as getting things done in order to try to make the pandemic more sustainable for the people of this country. And they needed to feel like someone was in charge and someone was taking care of business. And I think, those were the things that I think are most important when you're in the midst of a crisis. And then in the aftermath of the crisis, which we haven't really gotten to yet,
right.
you need to have that transparency, as we talked about before.
Yeah, but the other piece of this, Governor, is that the CDC, Dr. Fauci and others advocating wearing the mask in public. I don't know how the heck wearing a mask or not wearing a mask became some sort of political statement, but when the president does not wear a mask in a public forum, going into a plant, an auto plant, when the vice president who leads the task force, the coronavirus task force, does not wear a mask, does it send a message, and is that the right message?
I think it's a mistake. And I've told both the president and the vice president that. I think it's a mistake. I think they should be wearing a mask and leading by example. I think it's very important when you're a leader in a crisis to be leading by example. And anything that you're going to be asking of anyone else, you should be willing to do yourself. I think that's kind of axiomatic, and I think it's been a mistake not to do that.
And I love when people try to get inside someone's head. What are they really thinking? Because I think it's ridiculous, and we can't do that. But you were always known as a no-nonsense, in-your-face, get the hell off the beach, Governor. It's not paraphrasing. It's what you said. You're saying that wearing a mask doesn't show strength. It doesn't show I'm tough, I'm macho. It sends the wrong message. Do you think knowing the president the way you do, that he thinks it appears, dare I say, weak, because he also mocked Joe Biden, another story, for wearing a mask? What's the thing with masks and weakness and strength and leadership?
I simply think, knowing the president, that he's uncomfortable wearing a mask and therefore doesn't want to do it. And I think it's a mistake. I mean, I can't be any plainer than that, Steve. And I've said it to him. And when the vice president did that, when he went to the Midwest and didn't wear a mask when everyone else was, I think that was a mistake as well. I think the vice president's changed his context since then. The president has not. And that just tells you a lot about, their own receptivity at times to advice that they don't agree with.
You know, it's interesting, the issue of racial justice, the issue of racism, institutional racism. We're doing an ongoing series called Confronting Racism. What's interesting is that when you ran for governor the second time in 2013, I'm not here to tout your record, but you got a significant number of African-American votes. You spent time in the African-American community. Question, what do you think the most significant actions that need to be taken are to begin to make some genuine, real progress beyond the protests when it comes to racial justice and fighting racism?
It's no longer enough to go for symbolic action, Steve. We have to do real things. And you saw that we did that here in New Jersey vis-a-vis the Camden Police Department, which is now being held up as a model for police reform across the country. And
which is run by the county. I'm sorry for interrupting, Governor. People say, oh, Camden did away with its police department. Not true. The county government, help us understand this, the county government came in to run the police department.
What happened was the Camden City Police Department was disbanded. A Camden County Police Department with a Metro division dedicated completely to the city of Camden was put in place, run by the county freeholders. And so that's the way it worked. And what we did essentially after that was two main things regarding reform, Steve. First was community policing. And what that means is get police officers out of their cars, get them on foot, get them into bicycles, get them working and living in those neighborhoods every day so that people get to know them. They're not just people with a gun behind a window in a car, but they're people that they could talk to and live with and interact with. Secondly is de-escalation training. To say that the watchword of the Camden Police Department is and has been for the last 7 years, first, do no harm. Violence is an absolute last resort. And they've done that. And what's happened in Camden in the last 7 years, Steve? Two things that people thought were not consistent, couldn't happen together. One, the murder rate in Camden is down 81% in the last 7 years. But just as importantly, citizen complaints for excessive use of force by police officers is down 95%. We've nearly eliminated it. You don't need to have a violent police force in order to stop violent crime. You can have a police force that is understanding and that knows how to de-escalate, while at the same time bringing trust to the community and lowering the violent crime rate. It's been a huge success story, and I think should be a model for the rest of the country.
You know, Governor, what you just described in Camden is not just your point of view. It is the point of view of many. And I also remember seeing video of the Camden police chief or director, I'm not sure what title, he has marching shoulder to shoulder with those who are in the streets in the Black Lives Matter movement and others who are fighting against racism and police brutality. In Minneapolis, as we do this program in Atlanta, we don't know how those cases are going to play out, but we know what we saw on video. And I'm going to ask you your visceral, not just as a former U.S. attorney in New Jersey, not just as a former governor, but as a human being. What was your reaction to each of those incidents? One in Minneapolis with Mr. Floyd, and the other situation that we just saw as we're doing this program in Atlanta. Guy turns his back, with the taser and shot in the back, not to mention 2 minutes and 30 seconds before those police even called for any help to help that guy. You say?
Listen, both were reprehensible things. Minneapolis was just difficult to watch, to hear Mr. Floyd saying, "I can't breathe." What bothered me just as much as the officer who had his knee on his neck were the three other officers who stood by and let it happen. And that shows that there's a systemic problem in the Minneapolis Police Department. On Atlanta, it looked like a complete overreaction by the officer.
The opposite of what you said in Camden.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Violence first. I mean, listen, he had a taser, but that's not a life-threatening weapon to the
And
police.
his back turned.
Right. And basically, they stopped him because he was asleep in his car and they believed he may have been inebriated. You don't deserve a death sentence for that, Steve. And if he was running away, either try to catch him or let him go, but don't kill him. And I think that both of those things shows a lack of the type of training we're talking about that we need in Camden. And to get back to your original question, that's what we need to be doing across America. Leaders have to stop with the words and start with the actions.
How about defunding and doing away with the police in certain communities? By the way, Ras Baraka, check out our interview with him. He is absolutely against the idea of doing away with police departments, of totally defunding police departments. I think help us on Michaela, I think he called, our producer Michaela, called it a bourgeois liberal idea, inappropriate, not effective. You say?
I agree with Ras Baraka. It's a big mistake. And I will tell you, in Camden, we didn't defund the police. In fact, we kept them funded at the very same level they were before, but different training, different sensibilities. And what you're getting is more effectiveness because of it. And that march, it was Chief Wysocki in Camden who marched with them. And they originally called to let them know they were going to have a protest march. And Chief Wysocki called the organizers back personally and said, what if you allow police officers to walk with you and we can call it a unity march? That's the kind of trust that's been developed in Camden.
But Governor, as you say that, and that's to me, the definition of community policing means different things to different people. To me, that's community policing, that's engagement. When the president said, and you're not here to defend or explain the president, but you've been a supporter, and he said, quote, dominate the streets. He also said, quote, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, which comes from, and he didn't apparently understand the historical reference, from a former mayor, I believe, in Florida, who was making it clear that looters will be shot. That's the opposite of everything you just described. That's an escalation, not a de-escalation of a protest, not to mention what happened when he walked across the street from the White House to hold that Bible in front of St. John's Episcopal Church. Isn't that an escalation, not a de-escalation?
Well, certainly in the rhetoric it is. But what I'd also say is this, Steve. I do think that there was a huge mistake made by the Minnesota governor when the looting began in Minnesota, not the peaceful protest, the looting.
Right.
He needed to call the National Guard in immediately to get control of the situation. And he didn't do that. He hesitated, in fact, for days. And that violence spread across this entire country. And the violence had very little, in my view, to do with the murder of George Floyd.
Right.
Because the people who were concerned about the murder of George Floyd wanted to do peaceful protests to bring about change. So I think what the president more precisely should have said is that when looting occurs, when wanton violence is occurring, then we need to bring in sufficient force to quell that violence. And not by having them shoot people, but if you bring in a sufficient number of National Guardsmen and women, that stuff will stop without ever a shot having to be fired. And the Minnesota governor is absolutely culpable for the violence, in my view, that happened in Minneapolis and the violence that happened in many other places around this country, because that type of thing, that kind of looting and violence spreads like a disease. And if he had stopped it in Minneapolis, very likely wouldn't have had it in other places.
So interesting, Governor. We have 2 minutes left. You nuanced that description, and it was much more sophisticated, not sophisticated, but it's a complex response as opposed to a great one-liner. When the looting starts, the shooting starts. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean to certain people, but it seems to me, and now we're going to, final moments, talk about language. The institute that you started with others, but you said, hey, we need to look at more civility in politics, and you and the governor of New York, who you've been very close to, Andrew Cuomo, kicked off that Seton Hall University, the Christie Institute, if you will, looking at civility. I have to ask you, with President Trump not only saying what I just said, but a whole stream of things, still going after John McCain, a war hero, saying he was a loser, he hated me, and calling people names. The list is, Governor, I Googled the list of nasty, rotten things that Donald Trump has said. We don't have enough time. Do you ever ask him, you ever suggest to him, you ever advise to him, Mr. President, civility? Or is it just not in his nature and he can't do it?
I think the president is who he is, Steve. And this is,
Does it help?
the American people voted for. Let there be no doubt that this kind of conduct was on full display during the campaign when I was running against him in the Republican primary and in the general election against
And you
Hillary
called it
Clinton.
out at the time, Governor.
I did, but people should understand that this is why campaigns matter, because the people you see during a campaign are very much the same people you're going to see if they get power. And so with the president, I will at times talk to him about different ways maybe to have said things or do things. But remember something, Steve, he's 74 years old. He has been enormously successful at everything he's tried in his life. And so it's very difficult at this stage of his life to convince somebody to act differently when they feel like this is who they are and they've been successful in doing it. So I do it when I think it's very, very important. But I also know, and the American people should know, this is the guy they voted for. And his personality is no different today than it was when I first met him back in 2002.
That is Governor. This has been former Governor Chris Christie. I'm glad we got a chance to talk about the New Jersey 30-day fund. I'm glad we got to talk about a whole range of issues in politics and civil and racial unrest and what needs to be done. Governor, most importantly, on behalf of everyone in the public television family, we wish you and Mary Pat and your family all the best. And we thank you very much for all of your time.
Steve, thanks for having me on. It's like old home week, man. Good to be back.
Yes, some of the most, go on steveadubato.org, not for me, but put Chris Christie's name in. You'll see some entertaining, engaging, and provocative conversation just like this. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm Steve Adubato. See you next time.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by Gibbons PC, Hackensack Meridian Health, NJM Insurance Group, Operating Engineers, Local 825, and by IBEW Local 102. Promotional support provided by AM 970 The Answer, and by Insider NJ.
If you have cancer or suspect you may have cancer, don't let your fear of COVID-19 take over. Our commitment to cancer care and patient safety remains our top priority. Our cancer team is taking special precautions, including temperature screening, universal masking, physical distancing, and rigorous cleaning of all our facilities. Hackensack Meridian Health nurses are available by phone or by video visit. Please call 551-996-5855 to connect with the care you need.